And we start right on time.
Yeah, and it's the last talk, so yeah, we have all the time now.
Okay, super. Thank you so much for the introduction and for arranging this amazing conference. I really enjoyed listening to JB talk just now. He's somebody who has put his own stamp on software engineering ideas, contributed tremendously. And yeah, if you're looking to actually do some of this stuff, listening to JB's a great place to start. So I'm getting old enough that people are asking for retrospectives instead of asking about what's next. And I was going to say, I don't know how I feel about that. I do know how I feel about that. I hate that. But I can also understand the importance of putting what we're doing now into context. And as I'll talk about in a minute, there's a strong reactionary force pulling us back to exactly the stuff that I was reacting to in starting extreme programming. So I want to talk about that for a bit. But the general structure of today is about 20-ish minutes. I'll be talking about the past. And then for 20 minutes, even though you didn't ask me about it, I'm going to talk about what I see as the future and what I hope to see happening next. And then leave about 10 minutes for questions. As I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, people can submit their questions in Slack. I have Slack going on over here, but I'm trying really hard not to look at it. So that's where we're headed over the course of the next hour. So I always like to go back to first principles when I'm facing a difficult question. And software engineering is a difficult, complicated, fraught world. So rather than just kind of wing it, I want to have some first principles that I base things on. So for me personally, my own personal mission is to help geeks feel safe in the world. And that's because I personally, well, I'm a geek, and I personally feel unsafe oftentimes. Sometimes I feel unsafe because and it's all about, it's just my reaction. You know, I'm at a cocktail party and the swirl of conversation is going on and I just want to go to sleep. Sometimes, though, I'm doing things, I'm genuinely unsafe and I feel unsafe because I'm doing things in ways that aren't safe. And that feeling is valid, but I have alternatives for what I'm doing. So I came up with this mission statement after looking back at the first 25 years of my career and saying, what in the world is the thread that ties together patterns, programmer testing tools, refactoring tools, test-driven development, extreme programming? Like, these seem like they're all over the place. But that theme of helping geeks feel safe in the world, that made them all pieces of the same puzzle. They're different pieces, but it is the same puzzle. So that's one first principle that I work on. And what got me into this was looking at all the bad advice that I'd seen about here's how you properly do software development. And I noticed that much of the time was wasted. People would write documents that nobody else would read. Yeah, comprehensive documentation is coming back as a, well, wouldn't it be great if, except it's impossible. Anyway, I'll get to that, or you can ask me about it later. So people would write documents that nobody would read. People would do things too early, and then they'd have to do them over. People would wait until too late to do things, and then they would take much longer than they needed. And I realized, okay, Christian Bible talks about 80 years and 10 as being the lifetime of a person. So that's 70 years. But with medical advances, we can live longer than that. So I talk about 3 billion seconds. 3 billion seconds is about 92 years. And that's more like actuarially how long I can expect to live at this point. But 2/3 of my seconds are gone, and every second another one disappears. For many of you, only 1/3 of yours is gone. So congratulations on that, but it is 1/3. So I became keenly aware of the passing of time and the precious nature of that time and the irretrievable nature of that time. And I got angry that programmers were being told to spend those seconds on activities that simply didn't matter. So that was part of the emotional foundations, the emotional motivation for me to even start addressing these areas of software development. So when I got a chance to, so this is 26 years ago now, Easter time. I remember it was Easter time. This was the famous Chrysler payroll project. I was brought in, and it had to be Easter time because we had punchkis, which are a kind of Polish jelly donut that only gets made at Easter. So we had these things, and I listened to this project and a lot of people in pain, and I thought, man, this doesn't have to go this way. There's a very different way of developing this software that would be better for the people, better for the investors, better for the users. Why don't we try and do that? And was offered the opportunity to restructure the project. So I took everything that I knew about software engineering that I absolutely knew mattered, and I cranked it up to 11, just as far as I could go. And I took everything else, like comprehensive analysis documents before you begin programming, and I just chucked it out with the knowledge that it might be true that was really, really important, and we would really miss it, and we would want to have it. So just as for example, our basic cycle time was a 3-week iteration, and that was insanely fast. I wanted the team to produce production-ready software every 3 weeks. And to do that, we were going to have to integrate every few hours, which was also insane because nobody did that more than once a day, and. But what I wanted to point out is 3 weeks seemed like an implausibly fast cycle time. As it turned out, that was forever. And the proper basic cycle time for most projects is the week. Remember, I said I like to work from first principles, and one of those principles is to work with humanity and not against it. And one of the few things all the cultures around the world agree on is a 7-day week. And it's a natural division of the lunar cycle and so on, but everybody uses the week. And so I kind of chickened out by picking 3 weeks because I couldn't imagine getting anything done in a week. It is entirely possible for teams to routinely, predictably produce business value every week. And so reminds me of the joke, what did the snail say on the turtle's back? I know the jokes don't always translate, but we're going to give this one a trial. What did the snail say when it was on the turtle's back? And the answer is, whee! At that time, when faced with a ordinary planning cycle measured in many months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 weeks seemed like it was just impossibly fast. And it turned out that it wasn't, that there are shorter cycles that can productively be applied. So at that time, what I thought was cranked up to 11 turned out to be like a 7 or something. And one of the joys of the early days of extreme programming was watching how people took decision after decision that I made and exceeded it. And that was just delightful. Another example of that is Arlo Belshie's paper, Promiscuous Pairing. So the question is, what's the, how long should a pair work together before switching? And the comfortable answer is measured in days or weeks. You know, you sit down with somebody, you say, here's the problem, and you both dig into it and you work really hard on it and you get deep into it and you have your insights and you write your tests, you write your code, and you come back out and together you deliver value to the customer, and it feels really good. And Arlo said, well, but you know, is days or weeks before switching pairs really optimal? There are some downsides to not switching pairs. One is that the two of you kind of get into a group think. You share an assumption, you don't question it, and the assumption's wrong, and you end up spending some of those precious seconds on a consensual hallucination about what's the best way to progress. So the team took an empirical approach. I was about to say scientific. Is this not science? None of what we do is science. There's too many uncontrolled variables. But we can be empirical. And that's what the team did. And they started switching pairs. And I don't remember the exact details. It's in a paper, which maybe somebody can post in the Slack. They started switching pairs more frequently, you know, half a day, once an hour, every half hour. Now that seems crazy. Every half hour, a bell goes off, ding, and somebody new sits down next to you and they say, hey, what are we working on? And you have to explain everything that you were just doing to this new person. By the time you're done explaining, the dang bell's going to go off again. Well, it turns out, this is the best words in engineering. Those are my favorite words. It turns out, because that always means you would have assumed one thing and the reality is different. That's such an exciting moment. So it turns out that switching more frequently means that you have a lot of practice explaining your assumptions to other people. And other people get a lot of practice coming up to speed quickly on context. Everybody's sharing a bunch of context about what all is going on, and you achieve higher productivity, higher effectiveness, because everybody knows more about what all is going on. So you might think, oh, we're going to achieve economies of scale by pairing longer. And this team discovered, I'm not saying this is the right answer. I'm not saying this is the right answer for your team, but I am suggesting that there is there's still juice to squeeze from this orange. The team took this empirical approach and they settled on 15 minutes as their optimal pair switching time. That would just blew my mind. I was so excited because I didn't want to believe it. It felt very uncomfortable to me. I thought this can't be the right answer. And yet here is a team who did this thing. Again, I'm not saying you should switch pairs every 15 minutes. I'm saying you should figure out with your team how often you should switch pairs. Don't go with the comfortable answer. Don't go with the answer that makes sense up front. Give it a try different things and see what comes up. So taking a step back, looking at extreme programming, the influence it did have, the many influences it didn't have on software development, one of the fundamental questions I'm left with is, does any of this really matter? If you go to a successful company that develops software early in its evolution, and you come back 10 years later, can you tell if they paired? Can you tell if they had tests, if they refactored? The code's always going to be a mess. It might be a barely controlled mess. It might be a firmly controlled mess, but it's always going to be a mess. Did the kinds of things that we talk about in extreme programming, did that have a material effect on the success of the business as a whole? And so far, for me, the answer is I don't know. I kind of can't see it. There's maybe some correlation there. Certainly, you can develop software so badly that there's no way you can succeed. I've done that. It's possible to be so bad at software that you can't possibly succeed. But where is the margin where it makes a difference whether the team works well, grows together, achieves their full potentials as individuals and as a team, spreads their knowledge to the rest of the community, all these things that we value in extreme programming, works with confidence, works effectively, maintains strong relationships with people with the same or similar perspectives and people with different perspectives, works transparently, is able to turn on a dime on the basis of feedback, all those things that are the desiderata of software for me. Does that really matter for software development? And the answer is 25 years later, I don't know. I remember being at an early XP conference, and there was a panel, and there's probably 100 people in the audience. It's kind of packed in, and we were talking about spreading XP. Once you'd had some success at a company, how do you spread that so that everybody was working in this new style? We didn't even ask whether that was a good idea. It just felt so good to be working in this style and having positive relationships and so on. And a hand went up and somebody said, well, if you're more successful, your team is more successful than the other teams at your company, they'll just want to act like you're acting. They'll come and ask you, right? And I said, and I looked at the audience and I said, I can see 5 teams represented here in this room right now. Each of these teams applied extreme programming, had much lower defect rates, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude fewer defects than their peers, higher velocity, happier customers, and all of these teams have been fired, not just told to knock it off, but fired from their companies as a result of their success with extreme programming. And that set me back. Is just, why? How in the world can that be? You do a better, we get paid for doing a good job. We do a better job. The people who are paying us should be happier, not firing us. And it wasn't until the George Floyd protests a couple of years ago now that I had a reasonable explanation for what was going on. And this is where a lot of my energy and focus is on now today, which is the power structures in the workplace. And I have a piece out there someplace, I think on Medium, maybe about power differentials in the workplace, where I just listed 50 different ways that there can be a power difference in any given conversation in a workplace. You know, it's obvious stuff like being a white guy gives you power, relatively speaking, being confident, having a good vocabulary, being funny, shaved head is not on there, but probably could be. And what I realized is we aren't just free to develop software any way that we want. The practices of software that we see at a company are the shadows cast by the power structure of that company. So you might have an engineering-led company. That's where the power lies, and the shadows cast by that are going to be engineering-centric. Or you might have a sales-driven company, and the shadows cast by that are going to be sales-shaped. And if you, as somebody who's acting a part in this shadow play, try to impose your own different set of power structures, you're going to have a bad time. And you'll either revert to the status quo ante, or you'll go someplace else. So a topic that I focus on now is talking to executives about the power structure, talking to people in relatively privileged positions. I try and balance, talking to people in relatively privileged power positions about how their power could change. So I recently brought up again this better, cheaper, sooner, more model of project management, where we center better and try to improve it as much as possible as a way of influencing projects. Well, an executive who's used to exercising power by telling people, no, that's too long, by trying to control time, scope, and budget, it's not going to be automatic to work with a team that wants to improve quality as much as possible. In fact, it's going to be an annoyance to work with a team that comes back and says, no. The last time I was managing a software team, I was asked for a roadmap, and we had 87 state agencies to implement. So, we could kind of say, well, we've done 20 so far. We have 67 to go. So what's the order in which you're going to take the state agencies? And I said, I don't know. They say, I understand we can't exactly, but if you could just give us a kind of a hint of what order you're going to do them. I said, no. And I just refused to play that game because I knew that there was no information in my answer. And I tried to engage. So what are you going to do with this information? If I told you the order was like this, or I told you the order was like that, what decision of yours is going to change? And the answer is, we just would like to kind of know what's going to happen. Well, that's a piece of power. The power to get other people to make concrete predictions on insufficient information. That's a piece of power that needs to go away if you want to operate in this extreme programming style. Because as soon as you have a roadmap, you have incentives not to change. And the book says, embrace change. So as hard as that message is for some people to hear, I think without talking about how the power structures at work need to change, we're never going to make progress on the execution of software engineering, talking to people who, generally speaking, have less structural power in the workplace. And I really appreciate Kat Swettel and what she's done to highlight the work of Mary Parker Follett, who was kind of the anti-Frederick Taylor of her time. And there's tons of wisdom going back a century for how to run a workplace in this style. And we just fell into this very Tayloristic kind of power structure, which results in this Tayloristic behavior. In fact, we're seeing a reversion to many of the same dysfunctions that I fought against as wastes of those precious seconds 25, 30 years ago. I'm not going to be negative and harp on a bunch of them, but let me just mention a few. One of them is this return to, well, wouldn't it be nice to have comprehensive documentation of all of the code? As soon as you have documentation for the code changes, the documentation is out of date. Now you have either an incentive not to change the code, so you don't invalidate the documentation, or you have less incentive to change the code because you're going to have to change the documentation. This is an incentives mismatch. And I understand that it's difficult to be faced with a bunch of code that you're not familiar with, which is why on an extreme programming team, we practice compassion for each other by writing code that is as clear as our thinking is. And we work to clarify our thinking in the process. Another reversion that's happening is the return of the waterfall. So we'll have the product organization go and do a thorough survey of the market. And then we'll have the design organization create pixel perfect things. And then the programmers will just make all the pixels do that. And then away we go. That is the waterfall, and it doesn't work for all the same reasons the waterfall doesn't work. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but smart, well-intentioned people are trying to sell this very, very visible, very legible process as the way you ought to develop software, and it is a complete waste of time. Now, the only thing missing from that picture is the testing phase, which you need because the programmers make so many mistakes. And lo and behold, the QA department, as a phase of development, is coming back. People are saying, hey, we have too many defects, which is true. And the way to fix this is by having some adult supervision to these immature programmers. I think the solution is for the programmers to grow up. Take responsibility for the quality of your work. There's this whole TDD backlash. Oh, TDD is an instrument of oppression. Well, yeah, it can be used that way by abusive people, but the abusive people are always going to find some kind of excuse to abuse. TDD is a way of taking responsibility for the quality of your work. If you don't want a TDD, don't TDD. I don't care, but take responsibility for the quality of your work. If you're not using TDD to do that, use something else. But don't just say, well, it works on my machine and I'm done. That doesn't work for you, doesn't work for your teammates, doesn't work for your customers in the long run. And if it does work short-term, small scope, then that's a projection, that's a shadow cast by dysfunctions in the power structure and the organization that you work in. Okay, enough grumpy old man stuff. I'm going to talk about 3 directions for the future that I think would contribute positively to this situation. The first one I'm going to talk about is 3X. And this is a critical dimension that I wasn't aware of when formulating extreme programming. And this is just how much all the trade-offs, this is the international sign for trade-offs, just how much the trade-offs change depending on whether you're in the early stages of just trying out ideas to seeing what customers like. You find a source of value, and now you're growing as fast as you can. That's the second phase. And the third phase is, okay, now we have this thing, it's at scale. So this is explore, expand, extract. And these are 3 very different games. The trade-offs shift, short-term, long-term, economies of scale versus economies of scope versus economies of risk, what technologies you use, the cost structures, the time frames that you care about, all these trade-offs shift. And we ought to be shifting gears rather than just making dogmatic statements about, oh, if you don't test first, you're just irresponsible. Well, that's not always true. Sometimes you're irresponsible if you do test first. if the cost of delay is high and the cost of mistakes is low enough, the trade-off tips that way, then wasting time on tests is a waste of time. So 3X is an exploration of that. Explore, expand, extract. I've written a bunch about it publicly. Go have a look if you're interested. Second idea, and this is one where, I I really enjoy saying things and have people go, no, that could never work. That was part of the whole picking the word extreme. I wanted people to say, oh, this couldn't possibly work. And in fact, a lot of my motivation comes from that kind of resistance. The first time somebody says to me, oh, you know what, this might work, I just, now I have to go find a new project. So here's the second idea is limbo. I worked at Facebook for 7 years. Sorry about democracy. A lot of people were thinking about how to go from 5,000 programmers to 10,000 programmers. Little ironic in the face of the recent layoffs, but we're not going to go there. Not just now. Okay. So I thought, well, what does it take for 100,000 programmers to work on the same system? And one of the things that you know about systems is the smaller the changes are, the less disruptive the changes. So how small could we make changes? And that's where my friend Saurav Mohapatra came up with the name Limbo for this, because the Limbo song asks, how low can you go? So the idea behind Limbo is that everybody's making changes to the live system all the time. And so you make the tiniest change you possibly can, because everybody else's changes are coming through fast. So, we went from deploying once a year, once a decade, to once a year, to once a month, to once a week, to once a day, to once an hour. What happens when you're deploying once a second or 100 times a second? Those changes have to be really, really small. And, this is, of course, impossible and impractical. And the software on my cell phone in my pocket when I'm hiking in the Sierras can't possibly be updating 100 times a second, yada, yada, yada. I get it. It's impossible. But if we try, we're going to learn some interesting stuff. So the second idea is, what if we crank up the frequency of deployments to production? Rather than saying, okay, we're going to slow down, we'll have a QA department, double check things, we'll have a primary staging and the secondary staging. What if everybody was working live all the time? What kind of feedback loops would need to be in place, technical and social? And then what would be the consequences of those social and technical feedback loops for all the stakeholders, the programmers, the managers, the executives, the investors, the users, the buyers, the sellers, so on and so forth. So that's Limbo. I haven't been able to get people to even try it for a week on a toy project. I did myself with my friends at Iterate. We did it on a toy project for a week, and it was awesome. And that was 5-6 years ago. And people are just very reluctant to give that a try. So deployments are becoming more frequent. The trend is clear. Do you want to be ahead of that trend, behind that trend? That's up to you. If you want to be ahead of that trend, I think changes have to get smaller and smaller. And I'm the sort of person who wants to just jump 2 steps ahead and see what it feels like when we get there. The last direction for the future is something I brought up at an XP conference in Porto 3-4 years ago. Extreme programming lost the marketing war. We had already lost the marketing war to Scrum. Scrum had a much better story than we did. We lost the marketing war, and then Agile came along, and there's, if you want to really watch me get riled up, we could talk about that for a while. But the extreme programming got pushed into this niche of programmers who think programming is terribly important. And lo and behold, there are thousands of us, probably tens of thousands of us worldwide practicing. I run into pockets of extreme programming, the most like Shenzhen, who knew, in the most interesting places, but we don't have a marketing position. And I have a proposal for one, which is back to the power structures of software development and the business of software development. What if extreme programming teams became known as places where if you have programming talent, you can realize that talent and grow that talent, regardless of your background? I'm part of the awakening. I think woke sounds like a great thing rather than sleepwalking. But anyway, part of my awakening was realizing how many forms of privilege I had coasted through my life with. Now, doesn't mean I didn't work hard, but I certainly had a lot of privilege. What about people who don't? Extreme programming could be the place where even if you're shorter, or you don't speak the language well, or you're not from that background, or you didn't go to Caltech, or you didn't have these forms of power, you're welcomed. Your contributions are appreciated, accepted, amplified. Your learning is encouraged. If extreme programming teams are the places where people can come to become fully themselves, regardless of background, then the 5/6 of the geeky talent in the world that isn't white and isn't male will be extreme programmers. And we'll cede the other 1/6 of the market to the Scrummer Falls of the world, and that'll be fine. I presented the concept to a group of mostly white men, and wow, it did. I've had talks fall down flat, and this was definitely right up there with them. But I am dead serious about this. There are underserved populations in the world, and if we make sure that we serve them, we will have a longer lever to change the world in directions that we would like to see it changed, where fewer of those 3 billion seconds that are precious and that are ticking away go to things that just don't matter. And I wish that for you personally. I wish that for your teammates, for the people that you serve with your talents. And with that, that's 25 years of extreme programming. Time for some questions, I hope.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. That was delightful. I am not sure if we have many questions here in the Slack, though. I was trying to mark them with your avatar. So let me see.
You can just ask me a question you're interested in too, if they're just not going to contribute. I'm sure people are just shy. It's fine.
Well, yeah, since they are not in front of camera, I'm not sure if they're. Yeah, there is an interesting statement here by Nico. He says, what I like about XP, it doesn't do business with certificates. And that's something that I think I heard you talking about, and I think that was a deliberate decision. Maybe you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 minutes of this, and then if you have a more specific question, please feel free. It was a very deliberate decision. When Scrum certificates, obviously, I'm going to take a step back. One of the things Scrum did well that XP did not at all was build a business model. People could see how they could invest in Scrum and get a magnificent return. And so you ended up with all these certificate mills. Now, when I looked at that, I didn't like the divergence of incentives. The certificate mill's incentive is to charge as many people as much money as possible. They don't really have much in the way of costs. The people receiving the certificates, their incentive is to get as many certificates as possible at the lowest possible price. But each certificate, if it carries cash value, there's some clearing price for them. The employer's incentive is to have the certificates really mean something, like long-term, large scale. But if the individuals in the potential employer, maybe they just have to say, well, if 85% of our people are certified, and then they get their bonus. So their incentives are also not aligned. And the incentives that I wanted to create is, let's do a better job of software development. And none of those incentives align with that. So I just turned down the cash, and it was the worst economic move of one of the worst economic moves of my life. But it's one that, as somebody who tries to act on principle, I don't see how I could have done anything else. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, probably. What's your opinion on Scrum? I'm sure that many people want to hear the answer to this.
On what dimension? Right. It's a marketing genius. They picked an audience with power. I picked an audience without power. They delivered a message that sounded easy. Yeah, just, every 2 weeks, deliver some value and stop micromanaging the team, and they'll self-organize and it'll all be fine. And that's all there is to it. Wow. I mean, we never boiled extreme programming down to a message that sounded inviting. Here's 12 things that you need to, 12 difficult, nuanced things that you need to learn how to do really well. Oh, wait, it's 24. Yeah. So marketing genius. The results speak for themselves. I'm not going to trash on Scrum. It's the easy parts of extreme programming.
Yeah. And
turns out there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to do too. But going back to that metaphor that the software development practices are the shadows cast by the power structure, without addressing the power structure, you're never going to make any long-term changes to software development.
Right.
And Scrum certainly doesn't ask for any kind of changes to the power structure.
No, it just adds to it, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, reinforces the status quo ante, which makes perfect sense. People with power buying the excuse for them to continue to have the same power. Okay. Well done if that was your goal. That wasn't my goal.
How do inclusivity and diversity relate to XP? I'm sure you talk actually a lot about this in the book, but yeah, maybe in a few words if you can.
Well, something that awakening during the George Floyd protests taught me was just how many different ways power plays out to distort relationships in the workplace. Extreme programming is full of reinforcements of the power structure. Can be. It's an opportunity to subvert the power structure, But then you got to deal with the consequences of doing that. As a loud, confident white man in a pair programming with somebody who isn't any of those things, it is incumbent on me to realize how much power I have in that dialogue and to choose not to use it for my own purposes, but to lend it to my partner until they have power on their own. That's the best that I can do. And that's a very different set of skills than refactoring in teeny tiny steps. So I think there's certainly XP teams can be deeply inclusive because you have the chance to learn so much so fast. So you come from a disadvantaged background. This is an opportunity to catch up, but the people who come into that situation with power need to know that that's what happened and that letting go of that power is the the largest contribution they can make. It's a hard thing. I don't think it's uncomfortable as hell. It was uncomfortable as hell for me to realize, wow, here are all the ways that I didn't start at zero. And here's all the ways that I wasn't slowed down along the way that other people were. Ugh, feels kind of bad. Should I feel bad about the things that I've accomplished or the rewards that I've reaped? No, I shouldn't feel bad about it, but I should actively look for people who didn't have those advantages and see if I can make sure that they don't have the same kind of friction that they otherwise would have. So there's not a necessary connection, but there's a powerful opportunity for a connection. And that's why I think if we want 20 years from now to say, yeah, well, Scrum looked like it was doing well, and then XP took over, the path to that is through connecting with a wider variety of skills and talents.
Okay, maybe one last question, because there are a lot of questions popping up. So maybe if you feel like engaging a little bit more with the people, you can answer them offline.
I will do so.
Slack. Does the power structure asking for estimates mean we should embrace no estimates? The hashtag no estimates.
Does the power structure ask? Okay, so this is an 25 years later, Kent, realization is when somebody asks for estimates, they are expressing a genuine need in an ineffective way. There's some need underneath. So the big boss comes and says, when's this going to be done? And you know that you can't honestly tell them when it's going to be done. And they know that you can't honestly tell them when it's going to be done. So there must be a question under the question. What is that? And so what I try to embrace is creating an atmosphere in which it's safe for people with structural power to ask the question they really want to ask. So is their boss yelling at them about, hey, we're spending all this money and we're not getting enough for it? And so then they say, well, when is this going to be done? Because as soon as it's done, I get to take it to my boss and go, hey, look, I'm a good person. Maybe that's what's going on. And if so, well, if you can get to that level of the conversation, you can be addressing and meeting needs without following orders, commands that make no sense. Like, when is this going to be done? You don't know, they don't know, everybody knows that you don't know. And yet the question keeps getting asked. So what is the real question? Oh, well, If it's before this date, then I don't need to renegotiate this contract. Okay. Well, it's not going to be before that date. I would like it to be before that date. And nah, it's yeah, we can confidently say it won't be before that date. I'll tell you if things start going well. Oh, okay. So you better start renegotiating that contract. Oh, that's fine. You weren't actually being asked for a date. You were being asked whether at a business level, do we need to renegotiate this contract? Oh, I didn't even know we were thinking about that. But now that I know, I can tell you, yes, you should definitely renegotiate that contract. It takes a lot to build a relationship with an executive to the place where they can vulnerably reveal what their actual needs are. They're used to getting their needs met, at least short term, by making demands. And this is a very different kind of relationship. Some people want to be in that relationship. Some people don't want to be in that relationship. So best I can do is offer. I hope that answers the question because we're out of time.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So thank you so much, Ken. That was really brilliant talk. I loved it a lot.